I'm Dr. Chana Davis, a geneticist and contributing writer at Those Nerdy Girls, and I'll be your host today. I'm joined by Andrea Harmony, a fellow contributor at Those Nerdy Girls. Andrea is a pediatric-focused family nurse practitioner joining us from Philadelphia. She spends her clinical time at a local pediatric urgent care and works with the Philadelphia Department of Health, where she also loves geeking out on health statistics. She has been heavily focused on COVID-19 for the past few years. Andrea, thank you for joining us.
Thanks. Great to be here.
So before we dive into our questions, I want to remind you all that we don't take questions cold. We will be covering, as always, questions that came to us from our website. And so you can submit your questions into our inbox at thosenerdygirls.org. So we're going to first start with talking about COVID versus the flu today. This has come up a lot over the past 3 years. We have several posts on this, and Andrea did a great recent post on this topic. So an example of a question along these lines, we had one come in earlier this spring, asking, when are we going to begin to treat COVID like the flu? And why does it make sense, if at all, to continue to do that? So I know, Andrea, your post covers several dimensions of this comparison. And so I'll let you take it from here, but also hopefully address that specific element of the reader's question.
Sure. I mean, a lot of people would love for COVID to be more like the flu because we could predict it, but we're still missing a few things. One is seasonality. Flu typically lasts from fall to spring. Although it did kind of trickle off a little bit earlier last season, which was unusual, kind of mid-February. But even though COVID looked more typical last year, the peak it did have a spike in the winter. In the off season, it still caused way more hospitalizations. And right now we seem to be in the midst of a summer wave. We don't see that with flu. And even if COVID does follow a more typical pattern, we know that last season, which was our most mild COVID winter yet, we had twice the rate of hospitalizations for children and adults, and that includes young adults. That's when we compare COVID to flu, twice as many with COVID than for flu. Mm-hmm. And we want to avoid hospitalizations because, of course, we don't want people in the hospital, but anyone with severe disease is more at risk for long COVID. Whether that be chronic health issues or death later on. And we certainly have seen post-viral syndromes before, post-flu syndromes before, but not that has affected so many people, and certainly not as deadly.
Well, that sounds like a very comprehensive answer. So it's a more severe, it still remains overall to be a more severe virus, both acutely in terms of hospitalization and long-term impacts. And it's also less predictable.
Right.
So thank you. I put the link to your post in case people want to take a look, and they can send us questions, follow-up questions if there are any.
Yeah, I think people are also wondering, what is the risk level right now for COVID?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would be happy to speak to that. I always love gazing at the COVID dashboards and seeing where things stand, because it's constantly evolving. From our question box, we had a number of questions on this, and just an example of a question. Gina from New Jersey asked, how concerned should I be about the recent upswing in cases, and at what point does an upswing become significant? We also had another question, Mike from Princeton, New Jersey. COVID cases are up again. I've been vaccinated, boosted, and reboosted, and I've had COVID. How worried should I be? What steps should I take? And finally, I want to speak to a question or a comment. Someone said that I heard in the June live that COVID levels are lower than they have been, but I've been hearing that wastewater levels are locally and nationally are several times higher than in 2021. Can you clarify? So there's a couple of dimensions to this sort of COVID situation update. One is, what are the current levels? Second is, what is the trajectory? Where are things headed? And the third is, what does this mean for the behaviors? It's a fair amount to tackle here. So I'm going to just, give high level answers to each of those. So the first part is how much COVID is circulating right now. And the answer is it's actually still relatively low. It is higher than it was a few months ago. But if you look at compared to the last few years and what the kinds of highs we've seen, it's still relatively low. So, levels are always relative to what? Like relative to a few months ago, it's higher. Relative to other years, it's lower. And anecdotally, I'll definitely say that I've heard more friends and family getting COVID in the last few weeks than I had in the last few months combined. So it certainly is higher than where we were when we gave the last live. And the situation constantly evolves. So we have to really look at the timestamp on any update that we're hearing of what the COVID situation is, including these lives. So if you want to get, an update, you can get it from the news, but I also going to drop a few links here for resources directly from places like the CDC or Health Canada. So just to grab a snapshot of what they're saying, I went to the CDC website, and I can give you the link for that. And their top line summary is that various COVID indicators, including hospitalizations, emergency department visits, test positivity, and wastewater levels, are all increasing nationally. So that's a key point is when we're starting to get towards trajectory, is they are increasing nationally. And that I posted the CDC tracker here. And in Health Canada, it's a similar situation. I think we're a little bit behind the US. What they say on their website is that there are signs of continued fluctuations and indicators of activity after a long period of decline. This may be a sign of an increase in activity. But they also say COVID activity is low to moderate in all reporting provinces. So we're not in a high, red zone, but we're trending in a different direction than we had been for a few months. And one of the metrics that CDC talks about and Health Canada is that percent positivity has increased substantially. Despite the fact that longer trends were going downwards, we are showing recent increases for several reporting weeks. So I'll drop in the Health Canada link. All these websites give you a nice top level summary, but then they also give you lots of charts to look at regional differences, and you can geek out a bit if you want more detail on that. So that's kind of what what things are happening nationally. And then as to where things are headed, how bad is it going to get? We just don't know. These surges are so hard to predict. It depends on which variants dominate the landscape, how that evolves, and on how well protected we are against whatever variants are going to be dominant in the next few weeks and months. There are people who are still, experts who are working on forecasts. And when they typically do this, they say, what would it look like if, the current variants don't really change? Or what would it look like if the variants change and that we have new variants dominating that have a really substantial immune escape? And so you can get kind of pessimistic and optimistic forecasts based on that. In general, most of the forecasts right now expect that this fall to be no worse or probably better than past falls. But there's always an outside possibility. There is still a possibility if we get a variant and possibly, this BA 2.86 that's just popped up. We don't know yet a lot about it. Maybe if that one causes a lot of immune escape and it dominates the landscape, we could see a bad fall. It's hard to say. And I'm going to drop a link that's interesting for those that want to geek out on COVID scenario modeling. So then, but the hardest part of this question probably is like, what are the appropriate behaviors right now? Because the answer to that depends a lot on your local situation and also like your local environment, your case rates locally, but also on your personal circumstances, your own comfort with risk tolerance, the community that you're part of, the people that you interact with. We're not seeing changes at a public health level for recommendations because the actual risk to our health system is relatively low right now because levels are, pretty modest and we have a lot of population immunity. But for people who are at high risk, this is still a meaningful increase, right? So it totally makes sense that some people are ramping up their precautions substantially right now and should do that, whereas others are not really changing their behaviors in a meaningful way, except for maybe when they are interacting with others. So like amongst those nerdy girls, I don't know if this has been posted yet, but we did a little survey of, what are your behaviors right now? And it's kind of, there's a lot of variation. There are people who have high risk family members who are still, not doing a lot of engaging with the public and especially indoors. And there's others who are living their lives fairly normally, but ramping up their precautions in terms of testing and masking and just staying home when they're sick when there are high risk people involved. So sorry, I can't really give a satisfying answer to that. Do you have anything to add there, Andrea?
No, I think it's great the way you put it. The threat is low, but it's trending upwards. And I think that's, the bottom line.
That is the bottom line. Yeah. So let's move on and start talking about COVID fall boosters, because that's something we're getting a lot of questions about. So for example, we got Paul in South Florida asking, do you know when a new COVID vaccine will be available? And we had Dawn from Wisconsin ask, have you heard any news on COVID boosters or updated vaccines this fall?
Yeah, I can take that. So first of all, I want to say it's amazing that so many people are planning to get the booster this fall. We did an Instagram poll and 91% of people said they're going to get it. So I think that's amazing. Like you said, a lot of people want to know, when is it going to be available? We don't know for sure, but we sounds like probably sometime next month, so mid-September. Sounds like the vaccines are ready. There's just some regulatory issues, licensing and whatnot. So hopefully those will be available soon. In terms of eligibility, sounds like it's going to be strongly recommended fall boosters for children and adults, both in the US and Canada. In Canada, the recommendation seems to be to wait 6 months since your last infection or vaccine, whichever is later. CDC hasn't given out specific guidance yet, but with the last booster, they did recommend waiting 3 months after an infection, because that really boosts your long-term immunity. Now, it's really important for vulnerable individuals, especially, to get the fall booster. That's like people over 65, people that live in long-term care homes, pregnant people, and people with specific medical conditions. There's also a specific recommendation, a strong recommendation for boosters for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities, as well as racialized communities, because severe outcomes really disproportionately affect these groups. And if you're wondering how well the shot will work, the honest answer is we don't know, but we have a lot of reasons to be optimistic. There were some recent mice models from Pfizer, Moderna, and Novavax testing their XBB vaccine against EG.5.1, which is about 20% in the US right now, showing good antibody response. Both in the US and Canada, about 98% of people have immunity, whether that's from infection, vaccination, or both. So that, coupled with the XBB booster, should provide us pretty good protection against current variants and hopefully future variants. Of course, we do wonder what could happen if there's another variant that's not Omicron, another Omicron-like event, because Omicron was kind of a big genetic jump, and that could certainly happen again. If it does, the pharma companies can make a booster pretty quickly. If you think about this XBB vaccine, the strain was decided in June, and it's going to be ready in September. So the mRNA technology has enabled vaccines to be produced incredibly fast. And chances are that these vaccines, just like previous COVID-19 vaccines, are going to protect really well against severe disease and long COVID. But remember, they don't make us bulletproof. So remember to wash your hands, mask up in high-risk situations. And if you're looking for that shot, you want to check your local health department. And if there's anything, about your specific situation, you'd want to reach out to a medical professional. Anything you'd like to add, Chana?
No, I don't think so. Just that, it's so hard, this question of when's the perfect timing to get it. It is kind of this trade-off between letting your immunity wane a bit. There's some evidence that a longer gap is more protective, which is why Canada has all along been advocating for a longer gap. They think it'll give you better overall immunity, but it is a trade-off between, what risk are you exposing to while you're letting your immunity wane. I just want to say that, sorry, we can't give, there's no perfect answer, and different countries have different recommendations for that reason. So yeah, the best thing would be to talk to your health provider and to understand that the trade-off that you're making.
Right.
So I've dropped a couple of links to the CDC's stay up to date recommendations and the the NACI recommendations from Canada if you want to learn more. So let's talk a bit about flu shot now. And it's also one where people are really wondering often about timing. So we don't have specific questions yet, but we know those questions are coming because flu shots are out. And we want to get ahead of the curve by giving some recommendations on that.
Yeah, people always want to know this. When is the best time to get my flu shot? Flu shots are usually available at the end of August. And I know my local pharmacies have them right now, but it might not be a good idea for everybody to get them right away. Certainly, kids actually need 2 flu shots at some point under 8. So any of those kids, probably a good idea to get them their flu shot. Someone who's about to deliver, pregnant person about to deliver, because they're going to want to pass on that good immunity to their newborn. And I say for parents that are taking their kids to get their well checks, as one does, before the school year, they got the flu shots, just get them, you're already there. But for most people, it's probably better idea to wait until September. A lot of people really like to, I want to say, like, hack this and try to get in October, which is a good idea for some people. The reason they like to do this is flu season typically starts in October, and a flu vaccine does last for about 6 months, but you have some waning immunity that you lose about every month. So, if you get in October, you're trying to game the system and get your best protection over that peak. So if you can afford it risk-wise, it's a good strategy. But there are people who get hospitalized for the flu all year. In the summer, it's about hundreds to 1,000 people every week. So again, you kind of have to decide your own risk profile and, maybe talk with a medical professional to figure out what might be best for you.
Yeah, I think that the threat of flu is very much underappreciated in the general population. I mean, this comment, it's just the flu, is doubly wrong because it doesn't give flu the credit it deserves for being a public health threat. And it's, an inaccurate, there are a lot of differences that statement doesn't capture.
Yeah, I looked up that number and I was like, really? I hadn't thought about it, but that's still a lot of people in the summer to be hospitalized from the flu. You don't think
it's very surprising.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah, presumably most of those people have belong to some higher risk category. But it's certainly not something to take lightly.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else on flu that we should mention before we move on?
I don't think so. Do you have anything?
No, I think we'll probably have more posts on this coming, is my guess, as more questions roll in. So send us your questions if you have any.
And you had a nice post about these nitric oxide sprays, which I had looked up. I was interested in because they also, I've heard they possibly work for some other things. But do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, I actually had a lot of fun researching this. So a couple of questions just to call out from our readers. One question was, do you know anything about the efficacy and safety of, I think it's Enovid, that's how you pronounce it, I'm not sure, Sanotize nasal spray for reducing the risk of contracting COVID or other viruses? Melissa from the DC area. And Amanda from Waltham asked, what do you know about Enovid? My high-risk mom cannot be vaccinated due to extreme reaction, so we're interested in any possible added layers of protection. So I tend to generally take a pretty skeptical approach, but I was more impressed than I expected to be when I looked at the data on this. There actually have been several clinical trials on this, which is nice. Like a lot of over-the-counter products that people are selling, there's not really a good body of evidence behind them, but there's a moderate body of evidence behind this, and there are more studies ongoing. So this particular one that these two questions were about is called, it's a nitric oxide strategy where the spray creates nitric oxide once it goes in your nose. And nitric oxide, you may be familiar with it as because it can dilate your blood vessels, but it can also modulate your immune response, and it can actually kill viruses. But the key, as with any substance really, is to get the dose right. So the cool thing about a device like a nasal spray that's actually like considered a medical device is they can deliver an appropriate dose that ideally would be enough to kill the viruses, but not enough to do any harm and mess with your system. So that's what they're looking to prove in their lab studies and their clinical trials. So I just want to say, first of all, this, before you get too excited, this product is not yet approved in Canada or the US. They're looking for more data before they approve it. And I'll talk more about where it is available once I talk about safety and efficacy and what we do know. So with regards to safety, this particular product, this nitric oxide nasal spray, is looking quite promising. It's been tested in several hundred to low thousands of patients, and there have been no serious adverse events yet. It has only been tested in healthy adults, basically. So there have not been any pregnant women enrolled, no children enrolled in clinical trials, and nor people with serious underlying medical conditions. So just keep that in mind if you're considering trying to get your hands on a supply of it. And then in terms of prevention, there is only one trial that's directly asked this question. And it was a study done in Thailand in a university where they were trying to control an outbreak back in 2022. And it was not a randomized trial where people were assigned to either take it or not. It was basically offered to students, and they could choose to use it or not use it following exposure during their isolation period. So this trial found that the people who chose to use the spray several times a day after exposure contracted COVID at a lower rate than those who did not choose to do it. In fact, it was pretty substantial difference of 6% versus 26%. So that was a pretty impressive prevention trial, but it's also a trial we should take with a grain of salt because of the design. It was not prospective. It was not randomized. So we would like to see, more data on this front. And there, in fact, is a randomized placebo-controlled trial underway, again, where people will just be told whether or not to use it or not. So I would say it's encouraging, but also still somewhat preliminary. And that trial has had several hundred people in it. I don't know if I mentioned that. So that's in terms of directly asking the question, how well it works for prevention. And then, but there's a couple of other trials that didn't directly measure prevention, but they did measure other things that are encouraging. They measured what happens to the amount of virus in your nose after you use it. And they found that this spray does indeed, do a great job of killing virus in your nose, so that after 24 hours, if being used multiple times a day, you're seeing 95% lower viral levels and 99% clearance by 72 hours. So it seems like it can help get rid of virus from your nose. Now, the big question is getting rid of the virus in your nose enough to either prevent you from getting COVID or impact your clinical symptoms? And those haven't really been proven to the standards of Canadian or US regulators. So this product is already approved and available in some places, including Israel, Indonesia, Thailand, Singapore, Hong Kong, South Africa, Malaysia, Cambodia, and Germany, and India. And it's sold under different names: Enovid, Virex, Fabi Spray. Same product, different names depending on where it's being sold. And yeah, so I know some of you are probably wondering, why is it not approved here? I can't see the conversation with the FDA, but I did read a news story that said that basically the FDA said that if you want to make a treatment claim, if you want to make a claim that this thing, treats the virus, it's not good enough to say you're getting less virus in the nose. We want to see changes in hospitalizations. So that's the reason, understanding from the FDA. And so that's actually based on that feedback, the company, instead of doing a trial to look for changes in hospitalizations, they decided to pivot and do a trial to look for prevention. So their phase 3 trial that they're planning to submit in the US and presumably in Canada is specifically on prevention. I'm not sure that they have a treatment trial to show. I don't know if they really believe their product will impact hospitalizations or not. Like, kind of makes sense, like once the virus has taken hold in your whole body, getting rid of it in your nose can only do so much, right? So it seems like the kind of thing where if it's going to have an impact, it would be early. So just to reiterate, it's a potentially promising addition to the toolkit on the prevention front, or maybe like super early in infection, but it's by no means going to be a silver bullet or a reason to forego well-established precautions that do work, like masking and like Paxlovid and other antivirals. And I will drop the link to that. Do you have anything to add on this front?
No, yeah, I just think it's interesting. Yeah, maybe it's not going to be super useful currently, but the implications of future, preventing like in pandemic use or viral use is really interesting.
Yeah, I think this product was already well underway for flu, I believe, or other viruses, because the nitric oxide is not really, it's kind of a general strategy, a general antiviral and antibacterial. So it'll be interesting to see what trials come out against other infectious agents.
Yeah.
So we have 5 minutes left. Maybe we'll take one or two bonus questions. What do you think?
Yeah, I feel like people are probably going to want to know about the new variant. If you wanted to,
okay,
what do you think?
Yes, the one that's just making headlines the last few days we're talking about. Yeah. So, well, there was a question that came in. I think it was a week ago now. The question was, what is unique about the latest version of COVID's Omicron variant? So I don't actually know which variant they had in mind at the time, but I will speak briefly to BA 2.86, which a lot of people are referring to as the hypermutated variant. There are only a handful of cases. It's not registered yet as a substantial proportion of COVID cases really anywhere in the world, but it's been detected in enough countries that people are thinking there's a possibility it could take hold. And in order for it to take hold, it would have to be more infectious and or better at evading the immune system than the other variants in circulation. So what's unique about it, when a new variant comes about, sorry, I'm feeling, hold on, I'm just going to hide this. There we go. So when you're characterizing a new variant, the first thing you do is look at the genetics of that variant and look at what mutations does it have relative to the ancestor and relative to the current circulating variants. And so I looked at one of the leading labs that I follow on this, the Bloom lab. They tweeted about this and they said that it's essentially an evolutionary jump comparable to the jump that originally created Omicron. So this variant is quite different, has many mutations, specifically in the spike protein, compared to other variants. So it does look very different, and that's kind of all we can say right now. It looks very different, which means we need to keep a very close eye on it. And we don't know if being so different will translate into greater immune escape. We don't know if being so different will translate into more disease severity, more infectiousness. We don't know, but it's enough to make you a little nervous, to make a lot of people a little nervous. And then, but those are the things so then if you look at, for example, if you look at the World Health Organization website on variants, those are the attributes they're looking at. They're looking at, how infectious is it? How well does it escape the immune system? Is disease severity different? Those are the attributes that we want to understand about a new variant, but it takes us quite a while to understand those. The thing we can understand right away is the genetic basis of that variant and which changes have occurred. And usually we look at the spike protein, but there's other places where changes might affect its ability to get into the cell, its ability to, escape immunity. But spike protein is one of the key ones we look at to get a sense of whether we expect those other dimensions that really matter in the real world are different. So I don't know if that's a satisfying answer, but I'm going to put a link in case people are curious into the variant tracker from the World Health Organization, and then a useful news story on this. Do you want to add anything about the new variant, the latest?
Yeah, I also saw that from the Bloom lab, and it gave me pause. That Eric Topol just put out a little blurb today, kind of saying, at least so far, it doesn't seem to be following the same pattern as the Omicron spike. And again, like I said, 98% of us have immunity from either infection, vaccination, or both. So even if it is an Omicron-like event. Even if we should pay attention, but I think we're in a better place. So,
yeah. Well, all we can do is cross our fingers, keep a close eye on it, and be willing to adjust our behaviors if we need to. So
right.
That is all the time we have for today. So thank you, Andrea, so much for joining me. And thank you all of you for tuning in today. I hope you'll contribute a question in the future that we can consider for a post or for a live. You can submit your questions on the Nerdy Girl website at thosenerdygirls.org. And if you want to stay up to date to our content, please subscribe to our newsletter on Substack. It's thosenerdygirls.substack.com. That's it. Thank you again for being here. Hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. Take care.